I think the thing that affects me most now and restricts my life most is Wi-Fi, and that causes heart palpitations and arrhythmia. My spine seems to kind of contract. I get an awful compression feeling in my chest, and fatigue, just like unreasonable levels of fatigue for no reason, and no amount of sleep seems to make any difference.
My job took me around the country, so half my life was spent in a car, and in those days, you, as is today, you always feel guilty if you're not in communication. So whilst driving around the countryside visiting the sites, I'd probably spend half the time in the car on the mobile phone.
I went into work one particular day, and I can remember it as vividly as anything, and I walked through the door and I suddenly felt horrendous. I felt sick, I had needle shot pains going through my head. My eyes and my brain just felt awful. Went out the door and immediately felt better. And it was so marked, and it was literally like going into a kind of underwater feeling. And I did it a few times. I kind of went in and out the building, and I thought, am I going mad? Is this me?
I went to see a friend of mine who's an art dealer, and he's surrounded in Falmouth by student flats, and he got Wi-Fi coming in from all directions. And I put up with it for a while because I thought, I'm being rude, there's something other than this, something's wrong with me and it's not right. And by the time I actually managed to leave, I staggered out of the building, couldn't drive for an hour, didn't feel safe to drive, and then felt absolutely rotten for the next 2 days. And then it was at that point I spoke to a GP about it, and he said, you're probably electrosensitive to pulse microwave radiation.
When I actually found out, when I found out I was electrosensitive, I had no idea what it was. I'd moved out of my dad's house and I'd moved to my own flat. I didn't feel well in there whatsoever. I moved in and I couldn't relax. It was strange. I didn't know what was happening. I felt odd. I felt weird, dizzy, tired, and I just couldn't. Moving to a new house, I couldn't even just relax in this house. I felt odd. I felt like I didn't want to be in that house. The second night, I didn't really want to go home. I wanted to stay. I wanted to stay away from it. When I got home, I was getting Wi-Fi on my laptop, and I thought, well, I've never had this at home. I just typed in Wikipedia. I thought, well, Wi-Fi, is it a problem? Has it ever been a problem? And this electrosensitive thing cropped up, and it said tinfoil. I popped a bit of tinfoil over my head, and around that area, just the headache went. I had a brief little headache. The headache went. Popped it around my stomach, and my stomach stopped bubbling and going crazy.
I started to experience some quite weird sensations, specifically when on the mobile phone. And those started off initially as just a mild irritation, a prickliness, a sensation that you knew something was happening, but it wasn't painful. But over a period of time, this gradually got worse and worse and worse over about 12 months, so that I was starting to cut down on my mobile phone use because I knew something wasn't quite right. But I didn't stop. And then it got to the stage where it was causing quite a lot of pain, and I cut down even more and more and more, but didn't stop. And then one day, when I was actually taking some messages off my mobile phone, I put the phone to my head, and it was, the best description I can use is that it was almost like my eardrum exploding. The pain was intense, very, very specific. As soon as you took the mobile phone away, pain went away. As soon as you put it back, pain came back, so much so that you couldn't put the phone to your head. The pain was that intense.
Well, I decided to use foil, aluminium foil, not kitchen foil, but slightly thicker, but not significantly different really. I thought it would be quite relatively easy to do. As it turns out, it was extremely difficult to use, and I had to take up the floor and lay foil, and then put a new floor down, and it's very fiddly stuff. I had to connect every sheet of foil to the next with conducting tape, so that I could ground the whole cage effectively. It's a sort of a Faraday cage that I created. It's had a huge impact on my social life, my professional life, and my aspirations for the future. I really have had to give up a lot of the dreams that I had, and rethink, and that's okay. But it was not an easy thing to do.
And the psychiatrist appeared the next day, and I thought Mum was just taking me over to have a nice sleep away from the Wi-Fi. She turned it off at night so I could sleep. I went out for a walk and everything, the countryside. I was starting to feel a bit better, a bit more myself. And then these psychiatrists landed, 5 of them. And it was basically like me against 5 people. And there was just questions coming everywhere. They were basically manipulating words that I was saying. They were putting words into my mouth and trying to turn them around. They were saying, this isn't real, don't you? I was nearly in tears, actually. I was very upset. I don't like, when you're telling the truth about something. I hate the feeling of someone else, basically saying you're telling lies. And that's what it felt like at the time. And I was telling the truth. I was being as honest as I could. That day I got dragged away into a high security psychiatric ward with people who have serious mental conditions. And here's me, just been at work the other day.
You have a certain level of credibility, and it takes you a lifetime of work and doing things to create that credibility. And my credibility in my job was very, very important to me. And then all of a sudden, this problem that you've got is psychosomatic. And that's hard to contend with when, one, it isn't, and 2, the stigma that is then attached to that. Because although everybody sort of says, well, psychosomatic, that's not a problem, lots of people have, it is a problem. And particularly when you know that it's not. Because the general population will attribute certain characteristics to this condition. You're not stable, all those things that everybody will know what they're talking about when you say psychosomatic. He thinks he's Napoleon Bonaparte or whatever. That's hard. And my credibility in my job was very important to me. So did I talk to customers about this to begin with? Not at all. But there came a point in time in 2004-05 where I took the view, if Brian Sting doesn't speak out about this, who will?
It's very uncharted territory in terms of what exactly EHS is and how many people it's affected. Current statistics, prevalence is hugely variable. For anything, some people will say 2 to 3%, and others have extrapolated up to 70%. My own personal instinct is that, just like with so many other things we see in life, it's a bit of a bell-shaped curve, and you've got some people who show almost no reaction whatsoever to an EMF challenge, and others that you would say have EHS, who at the other side of that bell-shaped curve, and their life is utterly turned upside down by it, given the modern world. Most people will probably fall somewhere in between, and right now I think it is fair to say that a huge number of people are presenting with complaints to their GPs, which probably are being triggered or have some role through EMF, but neither they nor their GP would have any idea that that's what was happening. And cardiac dysrhythmias or palpitations is probably an excellent example. Headaches, another great example. Dizziness, insomnia, these things that seem to be progressively more common. If you think about it, we're so bathed in it. It's such a sort of ubiquitous solution in life that we go from our home environment to our car to our work, and everywhere we're being exposed on some level, that people do not have the opportunity to make that connection in their mind.
Well, at its heart, electrosensitivity is a hypothesis. It's the hypothesis that if you expose people with this condition to an electromagnetic field, then they will develop the symptoms that they normally get. So we at King's have done 2 experiments to test that hypothesis. And what we've done is we've brought a group of people, 60 people who have electrosensitivity, into our lab, and we've exposed them to the kind of things they say trigger their symptoms. We exposed them first of all to a real digital mobile phone signal, and secondly to a sham condition. So our equipment still beeped, the red light came on, it warmed up just the same as in the real GSM condition. It's just there was no active signal coming out of the antenna. And what we saw is that symptoms did increase in the experiment. People were developing the very headaches they told us about. But importantly, that was just as likely to happen in the sham condition as in the active condition. Sometimes psychological things can cause a physical symptom. In the case of electrosensitivity, lots of studies have now shown that where people expect to develop symptoms, where you expect to be exposed to something that's going to make you feel unwell, that can be sufficient to trigger those feelings of unwellness. It's what's called the nocebo effect, which has been described as the evil twin of the placebo effect. So if I give you a pill and I tell you it's got medicine that'll make you feel better, many people do start to feel better. If I tell you it's got a small amount of poison that'll make you feel unwell, that will cause the very side effects that I tell you to expect to experience.
From the very beginning, it was said that this was just a postmenopausal problem in women. And then men started to report electrohypersensitivity. And then the experts, the self-acclaimed experts said, well, no, it's actually only elderly because they are afraid for new technology and so on. And then we started to get children and teenagers and young people. And then they rolled out a new explanation, which was that, no, it's actually people with high education. And then it went on like this. But today you can see that any political color, any income class, both sexes, all age groups, etc., are affected.
Marino. And I wrote a book about it and published it in 1980. That's where I came to the conclusion that it was real. What's real? The ability of the body to detect these environmental fields and produce consequences. Now, the consequences vary depending on who's being exposed and other conditions. But the real thing was the idea that fields could do this. Because up until 1980, the dominant wisdom was it was impossible for these fields to do them. I mean, you don't feel anything, you don't see anything. It's not like there's anything that you are immediately conscious of, but these fields are there. And the idea that these fields, from a physics point of view, they're called weak because they don't cause shock or heating. That they could do something was considered to be impossible according to the laws of physics. It took me a while to figure out that the laws of physics didn't say they were impossible. And that's when I started my physiology experiments. I became convinced that it was real a long time ago. I had the proof that it was real. They're two separate things. When I published my paper in the International Journal of Neuroscience,